Greetings, students, and welcome to Theater 14A. So this is going to be a completely online course, and we're going to be working through Canvas. So I'm going to jump right in there to show you folks how to navigate the class. So go to the dashboard, and you're going to want to select the course, which is 14A. So if we look at the home page at the very top, you're going to have your announcements. So the most recent one I put up there was basically telling you the first 2 weeks were up, and to go ahead and get started on that. Obviously, you just want to work on the first week now, but I was able to get through the first 2 weeks, which is better than I did for a lot of other classes. On this front page, you're going to have 3 buttons. I might add some other ones, but I want to keep it pretty simple. Modules, which is how you get to the actual course content, the syllabus, and we'll cover that in a minute too, and then the Q&A cafe, which I will also cover as well. Okay. If you click on modules, so this will take you to the introductory module, which should include the syllabus as well. I'll probably put that in there after I finish doing this lecture. Welcome to the class, and then of course structure. And then you've got module 1, which is for this week, and then module 2 for next week as well. Okay, so go through there. There's a discussion, favorite monster. It's worth 5 points. You're going to want to go in there and engage with other students and put in your favorite monster and then respond to somebody else. Also, you've got your notes as far as what a horror film is. I'm going to be covering those with the PowerPoint in just a minute. And then you've also got your video links. Let me go ahead and click on there. This is where your movies are going to be located, is in a video links box. And then also the lecture for this class will also be in the video links page as well. So there is a link for the movie this week, which is good. There's also a download you can do as well. Right now I'm still trying to get all of my encodes up on West Valley's server in one easy to find place. Right now it's kind of spread all over the place. So I've got a movie link from my Google Drive. It's also what you have to do for the next week as well, as far as I can tell right now. I'll fix that as soon as I can. And then also there's a link to the original version of the Crazies, which is the movie we're watching this week. Not the original, but the new version. The whole movie is up on YouTube if you want to watch that. That's a George Romero film. It looks like a 1970s George Romero film, if you know what those look like. So very grindhousey, if you are into that sort of thing. So that's what a video links page is going to look like. Let me go back out of here again. And then after you watch the film, then you're going to want to do the study and discussion questions and answer those. Those are also worth 5 points to go through here. So in this case, there's 6 questions that have to do with the film, The Crazies. Watch the film, answer these questions, and you should get some decent takeaways. We can't really discuss these like we do in my face-to-face classes, but there is some discussion that can happen around these, and I will be posting my version of the answers in a couple of weeks. Okay, so that's the way the modules are going to work, the online part of it. Right now I'm going to jump into the PowerPoint for the class, which is also what I'm going to be using to present you the lectures most of the time. So that's the way I'm doing it now. Later on in the class, I may just stick to the pages that I have in Canvas, but since I've got these built, we're going to go through this. Okay. So what is a horror film? That's our first question. What is a horror film? Well, it's going to be a film that is meant to frighten you, throw some sort of horror at you. Not all horror films are frightening, but it'd be nice if they were. And they deal with a specific set of characters, locations, and subject matter. And what it is overall is that it's a genre. And what is a genre? But it is a film category. And that's what horror is. Horror is a film category. It's a label for producers to make things, and then for consumers to actually go see films. So it's like, hey, I really want to see a horror film right now. Are there any playing at the movie theater? If you could go to the movie theater, well, you should go to a drive-in theater because that's where horror films should be shown anyway. And usually it will be based on that subject material, time, place, and character types. So if you think of horror films, some of those things are a little more defined. Some of them are a little more flexible. The subject material needs to be something horrific and scary. The time It could be any time, but very often it's at night. The place, a cabin in the woods, maybe, someplace out in the desert, or a dark, scary building. It could be a lot of different places. And then character types, certain people we expect to have in horror films. That's how you get characters like the final girl, and then you have the jock who always gets killed, the funny guy who also always gets killed, the killers, that sort of thing. Specific types you expect to see. And then going a little bit deeper, we have subgenres. So what is a subgenre? But it's a subcategory. And the reason you have subcategories is to further delineate this the subject matter in these films so that you can get a little more specific. And they can be really specific. So some horror subgenres we have. We got monster films, which then get separated into zombie films, vampire films, werewolf, evil clown, space slug, whatever. Killer sharks. A lot of different subgenres available for just monsters alone. And then you've got psychological, and I'm kind of combining it with supernatural. Not all psychological horror films are supernatural, but very often they are. And when we get to psychological horror, we'll talk about that. So films that are ghost stories or have to deal with possession, something that's inside the mind. Slasher films, serial killer thrillers. So it's a thriller film, and it might have something to do with crime procedural, but also it can be a horror film as well. So that's its own subgenre and cross genre. We can talk about that a little more later. You have torture porn as well. Films like Hostel, things like that, where the whole idea is to just kill as many people in the most gruesome way as possible. That's what it's all about. POV and found footage. That's kind of a style, but then it becomes kind of its own genre in a way. Although I wish I hadn't. And then splatter and exploitation, which is another subgenre, which was really one of the precursors to a lot of the other subgenres we have today. So we want to start with monsters. And so we want to define what a monster is, first of all. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. That's one reason why in your first discussion I'm asking you to pick your favorite monster. So anything not believed to exist according to scientific notions, that's one possible definition. Something frightening which jeopardizes our notions of reality. So maybe it could exist according to scientific notions, but it's really friggin' scary. That could be it too. A congenitally malformed or mutant animal or plant. I like this one right here because it sounds really gruesome. Or an inhumanely cruel or wicked person. Inhumanly cruel or wicked person. That could work as well. We'll talk about humans as monsters too. So one of these was Noel Carroll's philosophy of horror definition of horror films, and then the others were from the Oxford Dictionary. Just figured I might as well give you folks a concrete definition. Okay. So examples of monsters, I'm sure you folks can already think of a whole bunch, but here's a few of them. Zombies, werewolves, mummies, vampires, demons, space slugs, sea serpents, kaiju, Godzilla, giant monster things, killer sharks, ghosts, serial killers, rabid dogs, evil clowns, creepy dolls, Cthulhu. I mean, there are so many different monsters out there, and people are still trying to create new ones in order to make them more original. So many good examples. Now, if we shift this a little bit, I mean, we know what the monsters are, but one of the questions we want to answer, and you folks will definitely want to be able to answer later in the class, because you're going to have to write an essay on this at some point, is what they represent. And when I say represent, it's something that's kind of, under the surface, and it's like, okay, this is what a vampire is, but why does a vampire exist? What is it really trying to say? This is the sort of thing we want to get into. Now, in a broad sense, all of these monsters are going to represent exaggerations of real-world fears and desires. And it's both fears and desires. There's a certain amount where it's like, oh, this thing's terrible. Another thing where we're kind of attracted to it at the same time. Not all monsters, but a lot of them. But it's these exaggerations of real-world fears and desires, which is the real reason behind a lot of these monsters. So common monster and horror themes you're going to be seeing is the idea of the abject. So it's that which defies borders and disturbs identity, and it simultaneously attracts and repulses. So remember I said both fears and desires here. The abject kind of gets into that. So it's that boundary breaking element of horror films where it frightens you but excites you at the same time. That's what horror films are meant to do. So the abject is a good quality that fits right in with that. Examples of that are possession. So someone's identity has been somehow transformed by something else that's taken them over. Boundaries have been transgressed. Transformations as well, definitely a good example of the abject. Puberty is an example of that. It's something that everybody has to go through, basically turns them into monsters. Bodily fluids, good example of the abject. Lost appendages, rotting corpses, all of these things take this idea of what we normally expect to see with identity, and then it just takes it and kind of pushes it in another direction, tears it apart. This is what we want to see in a lot of horror films. Unless you don't like horror films and that terrifies you, then you should stay away from it. There's also the idea of the other. So someone or something different and or threatening to you, a member of the minority, possibly you when the status quo shifts. Now, this is something that we deal with in our regular lives on a daily basis. People are always othering each other. You have one group butting up against another one. People tend to react and become frightened by this other group, and sometimes they react violently. Horror films, especially monster films, are going to take this idea of the other and just kind of push it to the nth degree to where the violence becomes the main part of that there. You'll see that, the monster is the other in some cases. Other times, if there's a whole lot of monsters, then the person becomes the other. So Frankenstein's monster is a good example. He's gross, he's abject, he's nasty, everybody hates him, and they just kind of push him away. Meanwhile, you, the viewer, are kind of siding with him to a certain extent. It's like, I identify with this monster because he's an outsider and everybody hates him. The creature from the Black Lagoon, that's another good example. You could also say the monster from The Shape of Water, which is kind of playing on that whole creature from the Black Lagoon mythos there. Isolated fringe dwellers in movies where people go out into the woods when they shouldn't, or they go out to the desert where they also shouldn't, run into people. You have this kind of culture war going on between them and people othering, and it ends up violent. Infected victims as well. They're people trying to quarantine, keep them away from them. That's what we have going on right now, people othering each other. And survivors in zombie and alien invasion films where the status quo is now the zombies and or the aliens, and then the other is the person who's trying to survive. They have now become the minority while the monsters are the majority, which is a scary idea. So zombies are where we want to start with our monsters. There's a picture of a real-life zombie from Haiti, someone who's in some sort of spiritual trance, possibly being controlled by someone else. And the kind of person they'd be controlled by would be a Bokor, or kind of a voodoo witch doctor who would have the power to control that person. This is the villain from the James Bond film, Live and Let Die. He also was like the spokesman for 7-Up for years and years. I'm old, I know this stuff. Here's an example of a zombie from one of the first zombie films. I think I Walked with a Zombie. And here are our zombies from the first George Romero zombie film, Night of the Living Dead. And here's one of the characters from Dawn of the Dead, the second movie in the trilogy. And then here we have Bub from Day of the Dead, which is the third film in the trilogy. So we've got all of our Romero zombie types right here, which has really codified a lot of what we think about zombies. And here we have Michael Jackson as a zombie, a dancing zombie. Okay, I can't hear Thriller without imagining a bunch of dancing zombies and other ghouls and monsters. Here we have a baby zombie. This may be from It's Alive, which was, but you have baby zombies that show up periodically. They're always nasty. Here we have a postmodern rage zombie. Okay, so this was, well, he was originally the protagonist in 28 Weeks Later, but as you can see, something bad happened to him. And then here we have zombies that are doing something that zombies aren't supposed to do. They're running. So this is from the Zack Snyder version of Dawn of the Dead, where we have running zombies. That's another postmodern take on zombies as well. And then we kind of come back to more of our traditional zombies, which is where we are now, our Walking Dead zombies, who still kind of stumble and fall. And it kind of points out the fact that it's really not so much about the zombie, it's about a lot of other social things going on in these films. So we've got African and Haitian origins of these zombies, a real thing, a spiritual practice. And then you have our Romero versions, then we have our postmodern zombies that run, and then we move back to The Walking Dead and kind of a neo-traditional type of zombie, which just shows that the zombie is kind of a perennial thing. So, what is a zombie? The living dead, an infected lunatic in some cases, if we're on the the infectious disease narrative, could also be a mindless automaton under another's control, which is where the idea of the zombie really came from in the first place. Now, what does it represent? Let's go down a layer, kind of dive into that. So what would be a reason for creating a monster that is like this? A fear of the loss of humanity. Remember, it's an exaggeration of these fears. Mindless conformity as well in some films. A fear of disease and contagion, something we're all afraid of. We're living through a contagion right now. There just don't happen to be zombies, but there's a lot of people that are kind of reacting almost like there are. There's also the fragility of civilization. We're seeing that right now, that we're kind of tearing at the seams because of the fact that civilization is not meant to undergo something like this. Just imagine you add zombies to that and then it really starts to collapse. Also a mockery of life and death, because a zombie is someone who's dead and now they're alive again, and we're looking at them. It's like, well, how is this happening? And it kind of really, it's a really good example of the abject, because it takes your idea and your definition of life and throws it in the waste paper basket, makes it nasty. So another thing about zombie films is they are inherently political. You can't really escape that. One reason is you've got real human issues and questions in there, despite the fact that you've got The Walking Dead. You have all the humans there in there as well. So does society turn us into zombies? The things that we do on a day-to-day basis, that repetition, does that make us zombies? Will science go too far? Someone breaks a beaker in the lab and it's like, oh, damn. And then all of a sudden everyone turns into zombies and boom, apocalypse. Is civilization doomed? I know some of you might have not the nicest answer to that question right now, but that's something that zombie films very often cover. It's like, oh, something has happened. Will we be able to recover? Maybe we can't handle it. Are the survivors worse than the monsters? This is something that The Walking Dead gets into every episode. A little more of that. The zombies are there, but it's really the people going after each other that's the main conflict. And then also, why can't or won't the government help? That's a common thing that happens in zombie films. Everything just goes to hell, and it's like, well, the government will save us, and it never really does. So that's another major issue that it's going to be dealing with. So the film for this week is The Crazies, and it's from 2010. And is a remake of a 1973 George Romero film that was also called The Crazies. The films are very, very different. They deal with like the same plot, but the details are definitely very different. So I recommend watching both, because they're both, good films, and they're very different. So our synopsis: after a strange illness starts infecting the citizens of a small town in Iowa, the military moves in to clean up the mess, and they don't care who's infected and who isn't. So here we go. The government comes in to try to make things better, and they can't really do it. So we jump right into that kind of political landscape right there. So the 1973 version, because it was made in 1973, it's dealing with post-Vietnam issues, which was definitely a mistrust of the government and wondering whether society can really sustain itself. So it definitely gets into that. The newer version, because it was made in 2010, 2008, we had the stock market crash and the beginning of the Great Recession. So there's definitely an element of that in that as well. And you get culture war issues as well, which can manifest itself in a lot of ways. But definitely what we see is the kind of government versus the small town kind of thing. So Wall Street versus Main Street, federal authority versus local authority, how a closely knit community unravels under duress. I realize this is kind of a raw wound that the country's kind of dealing with a lot of these issues right now, but that's one reason why zombie films, and this one in particular, tend to be very, very timely and timeless at the same time. I'm not going to cover the discussion questions because they're going to be in a discussion forum in the module. So after you watch the movie, go directly to that and answer the questions. Okay. Enjoy the film, enjoy the first week of class, and I will see you folks next week.